Welcome everyone who is joining us for this final EnergyREV webinar. Numbers are climbing up, so I'm just going to hold off on officially starting just until I see it ticks past a number that feels kind of like really grand to me at that point. Whilst those numbers are ticking up, we've just gone past 70, which is very exciting. You can tell which number where I start to get really happy about numbers in. Quick introduction. So my name's Jeff Hardy. I run a company called Sustainable Energy Futures, and I'm going to be your chair today. So as well as running a company, I used to be an academic. I'm now a recovering academic. And in my academic time, one of my favorite projects I was ever involved in was EnergyREV, where I led on the governance work stream within that program. But since I've left EnergyREV, I'm now doing even more exciting things in the real world, which is helping set up a new energy company in Wales, Ynni Cymru, which is a company that's going to try and accelerate the delivery of these smart local energy systems across Wales, going to benefit to local people and all Welsh citizens. So that's super exciting. We've got Alex from the Welsh Government on the panel later as well. So lots and lots of really exciting stuff going on. However, let me get to this event. So this is, if you like, a final celebration of all of the really good stuff that came out of the Energy Revolution Research Consortium, which was part of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. So much stuff. You'll get to hear from Becky about what came out of it in her, what I'm going to define as miraculous synthesis of everything, because it's like turning a lot of information into something incredibly coherent. Before we get to Becky, we're going to have two brief introductory comments. So the first one from Rob Saunders, who I'll hand over to in a second, who was responsible for the whole Prospering from the Energy Revolution work stream at Innovate UK. And then we're going to have a brief intro from Stephen MacArthur, who was the principal investigator for EnergyREV. So understands the chaotic process by which it came together and became the thing that it is. After that, we're going to have Becky, who's going to walk us through the report, and then we're going to have a really interesting panel discussion with a mixture of practitioners, local authority, Ofgem, Welsh Government. So it's going to be really interesting to see how people are responding to what's come out of this Energy Revolution Research Consortium, but also the kind of like, what it feels like to be trying to do stuff in this space now that we know a lot more about the science, the research. What's it like on the ground? What's it like trying to do this stuff for real? Then we'll bring together all of our Becky and Stephen together for a panel discussion where we want to hear from you, your questions and answers. So there'll be an opportunity in the usual functions, in the Q&A function, to put in your questions. So get them in there early, get them upvoted as soon as you can, and we'll try and get to those questions, as many of them as possible in the last 30 minutes or so. Right, without further ado, over to Rob. So Rob, so tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about what the PIPA programme was all about.
Very good. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to Regen for hosting this. And welcome, everybody. I'm Rob Saunders. I had the pleasure of running the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme between 2018 and when the funding finished last year. And it's been an amazing journey, really, quite a thing. I'll tell you just a little bit about the kind of context for EnergyREV within that programme, what we were trying to achieve, just to set this whole session up, I think. So we set up Prospering from the Energy Revolution to look at the potential of smart local energy systems. And we took a real whole systems approach to that investigation. Clearly, it was about how we put things together in places. So how do we technically integrate things across supply, use and storage across the energy system of its different vectors. But it was also about what are the business models that enable these things to scale and commercialize? How do we engage people in these places as we go through these energy transitions? How do we finance it? How do we set up governance that makes it all work together? And really all of that, how do we change a system? How do we transition from one state to another through a system that we all depend on so very heavily? So it was really a very new kind of program for Innovate UK, a real whole systems approach, and quite an experiment, really, versus the traditional kind of innovation program of developing new technologies from one TRL to the next TRL. And one thing that enabled it was this Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund funding, which was quite unique and remains quite unique, actually. But this was funding that was available across UKRI, and that meant that we could work research and innovation together in a properly integrated program. You might think that that might be very commonplace, but it's not. And that gave us a really strong desire to figure out how to put research and innovation together in a way that created more than the sum of its parts. And that enabled us to really go about trying to create EnergyREV, what turned into EnergyREV. And that also was quite an experiment, to be honest. We hadn't done that sort of thing in that way before. When I came to trying to get the approvals for this, I'd been talking with a colleague at DEC, as was, and talking to him about how we might try to do this. And he said, Rob, we do loads of really good deep analysis in little bits of the energy sector. What we don't do enough of is working out what it all means, synthesizing across the whole space, trying to draw insight out of that whole set of research. And that really struck home for me. And then when I had to present it to Sir Mark Warport, who was our new chief exec of UKRI, when we were presenting business cases, he said, we've got loads of energy research. I don't think we need more energy research. And luckily, I'd had this conversation and I was able to say, actually, we do have loads of energy research, but we don't make the best of all of it by pulling together all of the learning from across it and synthesizing our learning. And that's what's needed here. And he bought that. And I think that was an experiment as well in trying to create this more synthesizing research consortium than traditionally is done, certainly in the energy sector. So we put together EnergyREV as trying to solve for those sets of issues and problems. And with the research councils, we pulled together a group of academics who were interested in this area of smart local energy systems from right across that whole system that I described earlier. Got everybody in a room for 2 days. I can't remember where now. And we did lots of brainstorming and barnstorming and arguing, and came up with some really great ideas for how this thing might work. And then at the end of those 2 days, the facilitator said, right, now anybody who thinks they'd like to lead this research consortium, would they like to go and stand over there? And I've been thankful for this for 4 or 5 years now, but one person took a big step forward. I think a lot of people took a step backwards as well. And thankfully, it was only one person, and it was the right person. And that person was Stephen MacArthur from Strathclyde, who took a really open and innovative view of how we might run this thing called EnergyREV, was really flexible in his thinking about how we might go about it, and maintained that view through its 4-year period. So it's a very different kind of energy research consortium. It's done some really different things. And I think, as with any experiments, it's really crucial that we learn from those experiments. And that's what today's about as much as anything else. I'm sorry I can't stay with you for the whole afternoon, but I hope you have a really good time, and make sure you ask lots of questions and get under the skin of what went on in EnergyREV. Thanks, Jeff. And over to you, I think, Stephen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. And yes, we're all very glad as well that Stephen did indeed. I don't know if it was not taking a step backwards or taking a step forwards. I seem to remember it being taking a step forwards, but you can tell us. And if I remember rightly, it was in Birmingham where that workshop was. So Stephen, why don't you come and tell us whether it was a step forward or a step backwards, but more importantly about kind of like EnergyREV itself.
Thank you, Jeff. And in fact, was a step forward, and I'm very pleased I did, because it was a really great programme to be involved in and helping lead and shape with the great team around us. So thanks very much for all the kind words. I'm Stephen MacArthur from the University of Strathclyde, and it was my privilege to be the principal investigator and to lead the EnergyREV programme, or the Energy Revolution Research Consortium. And Rob's given you some great insight into why this was put together, what we were trying to achieve. So I've just got a few slides and images I want to take you through to set the scene before we get onto the really important bit of feeding back the lessons learned and what we've drawn from this programme. So if I could have the next slide, please. So the overall consortium included 32 co-investigators from 22 universities. So it was a complex set of exciting activities to try and coordinate, but we endeavoured to bring the right people together with the right expertise to make sure we had everybody available, from deep academic expertise to explore the challenges around smart local energy systems. And we had the teams in place that could engage strongly with the programmes, projects and demonstrators funded through the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme that Rob was talking about and was leading. So you can see in front of you the type of areas we covered. It was very broad, and this talks to that whole system. So as we're thinking about a smart local energy system and what it means and how we deliver it and the benefits we get from it, we need to think of everything, as you see in front of you, from policy to social science insights and how that drives it, to what it means in terms of business innovation and finance, to what that means to the whole engineering, data and systems in terms of operational systems side of it, and then thinking about the interactions between the energy systems we're creating, these smart local energy systems, and the environment, and putting that all together into this multi-vector whole systems viewpoint. And if we go on to the next slide, what we were really trying to do was follow some guiding questions. So we were trying to use the academic expertise, all the other UKRI programmes and EPSRC programmes that have been funded in the past, or from other research councils, and all the other research that these academics and institutions had been involved in, to draw that together and use it to try and work out how smart local energy systems add value, or how they can deliver benefits in the ways that, the traditional energy system can't. We were looking at how we can unlock smart local energy systems to make sure we get smart local energy systems at pace, and how can we roll this out across the UK. And what we were doing in the diagram in front of you with the arrows on it was showing you that we were trying to bring the EnergyREV expertise, so the academics and all the work they've done, to inform the projects that were getting funded through PFR, the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme. So the future designs, the practical demonstrators, we were trying to inform those. We were trying to integrate our knowledge from other global activities that were going on to make them more effective, or to guide them and inform them or provide support. And then we were taking systematic research and analysis across them. And we were working very closely with the Energy Systems Catapult, who had a major activity within the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme. They were supporting the projects. They were supporting shared learning. So we, as an EnergyREV consortium, were trying to make sure we leveraged all the academic expertise and research expertise we had into this programme. Can we have the next slide, please? So in terms of boiling that down to some of the key activities, we always thought about it as three major activities that EnergyREV delivered, built on the academic expertise and research expertise within it. So in that middle pillar in front of you, we did undertake some novel research. So we made sure that within the overall Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme and our engagement with it, there were areas that we saw opportunities to do some novel research, some new academic activities that would help impact on a net zero future. So we did do some fundamental advances to try and understand how new ideas and new concepts would push forward smart local energy systems. But as Rob described at the beginning, this wasn't just a typical academic programme where we were looking at novelty. So the pillars on the left and the right-hand side in front of you are very important to us. So on the left-hand side, one of the big activities we undertook was synthesising knowledge, and today's event is a culmination of that. And what we were doing in terms of synthesising that knowledge was trying to bring together insights and learnings from previous research, making sure they're communicated into the programme, and drawing out those learnings and those insights that came from the PFR programme to make sure there was a legacy of that knowledge and insights going forward. And we were also helping on the right-hand side pillar, helping to explore those smart local energy concepts. So we were helping develop an understanding of what works, why it works, how it needs to be adapted. And then the other thing we were considering was how do you roll it out across the UK? How do you roll it out and scale it? How do you make sure that it's not just bespoke development that doesn't go on to the next stage of a smart local energy system, unlocking benefits for citizens and local communities? So we took a very knowledge exchange driven approach, not a research intensive academic novelty driven approach, which meant we did different type of project activities, we did short-term activities, we did support activities, and we were making sure that we were leveraging academic expertise and starting and stopping activities where they created greater value. Can I go on to the next slide, please? We did that across a number of streams, and I won't go into this in great detail, but you can see the themes in front of you. There were 4 horizontal themes where we were thinking about the cyber-physical aspects that you had to understand and roll out around smart local energy systems. We had to understand the business and financial practices, the policy, regulation, markets and governance, and the user engagement. But cross-cutting that, we had 2 cross-cutting themes, and one was around developing that whole systems understanding of what was happening through this challenge project, the Prospering from the Energy Revolution Challenge Programme, and cross-cutting all these areas, what we would need to do to support scale up. And in today's event, you'll hear some of the details of what we learned out of that and some of our key insights. Can I have the next slide, please? And the other thing we did was we tried to position what was the role of research in these type of industry and delivery and demonstrator type programs. And we tried to show the benefit of having researchers embedded across this that would think about aspects of how do you develop a smart local energy system, how do you continue to make it a success, make it a success in the future, how do you scale it up and roll it out. So we were working with UKRI and Innovate as part of that, the research councils as part of that, to actually understand the type of role that researchers and academics and research teams can take in these type of challenge programs to support the wider learning and the acceleration of the activities. So we drew out a range of learnings around how you operate as a program to offer flexibility and value and impact from the academic community in these really important activities. Can I have the next slide, please? Which takes us on to me finishing the summary of what we achieved and what we were trying to achieve through EnergyREV, and allows me to pass on to Becky Ford. And Becky was the research director who did a fantastic job of actually cutting across all of those different themes, working with the teams to make sure we drew out key findings, recommendations, insights, and she's now going to pick up and take you through those before we go into the panel. So over to you, Becky. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And thanks to Rob as well for such great introductions. And Stephen, it was a real privilege to work with you and the wider team to deliver EnergyREV. And I am very excited to be able to share some of the insights from this work today. But I also just want to acknowledge the 90+ researchers who worked on EnergyREV, because this report draws on their work, and you can find all of that on the EnergyREV website as well. Next slide, please. So before we get into the meat of the session, I'd like to just kick off by setting out how across the EnergyREV program, we came to define smart local energy systems. And in part, this is about new and smarter ways of connecting and operating energy technologies across energy vectors within that local area. But it's also very much about the people in the system. So opening up new ways for citizens, communities, and other local stakeholders to engage, with the premise that bringing this range of stakeholders together locally, that smart local energy systems can help make the transition to net zero faster, cheaper, and more equitable. And it's all very well for us to talk about this conceptually, but I think it begs the question of what does this look like in practice? Next slide, please. And what this looks like in practice is incredibly diverse. And so across the UK, we identified over 750 local and community energy projects, and we GIS mapped them with a huge amount of metadata about things like their scale, their budgets, their funding sources, the energy vectors, technologies, and so on. That map is on the EnergyREV website. But we also did a more in-depth analysis of the 146 energy system projects that we could find good secondary data on. And that showed us that whilst there was a huge amount of diversity in the projects we saw across the UK, that there were some patterns within that. And they related to things like the organisations that were involved in delivering the project, the complexity of the project in terms of the technologies or the vector involved, the sort of scale of the project financially and geographically, as well as the focus area, so whether it was supply side, demand side, or network focus. So we did see some kind of clusters and themes emerging, and some of that was driven by the goals of the project funding or the objectives of the funding pool, because a lot of these developments were supported through various different sorts of funding streams and funding mechanisms. Next slide, please. But we did also see a smaller group of smart local energy systems operating on more of a business as usual basis. So they weren't these project funded pilots or demonstrators, but they'd found ways to operate in an ongoing capacity. And these tended to be a bit smaller in terms of their geographic scale. They included more technologies as well to help make up that business case. So we did see quite a lot. And I think it's fair to say that it's pretty vague in some ways when it comes to talking about smart local energy systems. Next slide, please, Becky, actually. When it comes to talking about these smart local energy systems in terms of things like the technologies, the organisations, the business models, the objectives, and so on. Because what we really saw was that different places were doing different things for different reasons with different organisations. And so really, there is no single smart local energy system, but actually we realised that you can't really define it in terms of those specific technologies or goals, but it's more about an approach to designing, building, and managing future energy systems. So it's the how, it's not the what. And that means that we need to instead think about what are those different energy system elements from generation to consumption and everything between that are being brought together. How are they being connected in a smart way? So how is information and communication technologies being used to capture better data and then using that data in better ways to manage the operation, to deliver those outcomes you want to deliver? And what does that mean from a local perspective? So where does that geographic boundary sit? How are local stakeholders and communities being engaged, and what sort of local benefits are we trying to deliver? So it shifted us from thinking about defining SLES as a thing, as a what, to more around the how and the approach of doing things moving forward. Next slide, Becky, please. So the other thing I wanted to just touch on up front is, I guess, the why. So we talked a bit about it's not the what, it's the how, but the why is just as, or if not more important. And I think that sort of comes to this point that smart local energy systems have the potential to bring about significant benefits in a huge range of areas, both locally and nationally. And so through the work that EnergyREV did, we've built evidence around some of these benefits, whether that's energy system benefits through improved operation of the networks. Often that leads on to financial benefits. So in part, that's from the improvements in energy system operation, but in part, it's from taking that more locally and contextually relevant approach when you're targeting action. There are often wider economic benefits that can be brought in through development of things like new local businesses, new local supply chains, new skills developments, and so on. There are benefits that can come directly to the households involved in the smart local energy systems, as well as wider social and environmental benefits, both in places and to the UK more broadly. And SLES typically tend to also improve equity and justice outcomes. And so I think it's fair to say there are significant benefits to unlock. But I'd just like to reflect on a conversation that I had with David Shipworth. So David was one of EnergyREV's lead investigators. And I had a chat with him when I started to pull this report together. And I asked him, as I asked many of the lead investigators that I worked with, what the key learnings for him had been from the programme. And he said that one of the biggest insights was that SLES can bring about, the benefits and the value that SLES can bring about was way bigger than we initially thought when starting out EnergyREV. It really has the potential to unlock huge value, but that the complexity to deliver that is also way bigger than we realised when we set out at the start of this programme. So next slide, please. So we have this value complexity challenge, if you like, for SLES. And to be able to create smart local energy systems and unlock that value requires us to take that whole system approach, because we really need to align all of the different puzzle pieces to both create the necessary conditions for setting up smart local energy systems, as well as those necessary conditions for supporting the outcomes. And the image you see on this slide is actually an incredibly simplified version of our theory of change, which is that theory of how do you set up the SLES and how do you get the good outcomes. Next slide, please, Becky. I'm not going to dwell on this, but this is a screenshot from the interactive map of the actual theory of change that we built. And it points to key pieces of evidence along that as well. And if you are a data geek, and I'm sure many on this call are, the link to this is in the main report, and you can go about and have a bit of a nosy for yourself. But next slide, please, Becky, because I want to actually just step out of that complexity, step back a little bit and unpack that. And really, when we looked at that theory of change and we looked at the huge volume of the work done in EnergyREV, we saw 7 key areas where action is needed to drive the development and the scale up of smart local energy systems. And these form our 7 building blocks of action. And I'm going to talk through each one in turn, and it really will be a whistle-stop tour, and far more information is available in the actual report. Next slide, please. So the first building block is all about policy, regulation and governance, because there are a diverse range of stakeholders who have very important roles to play in delivering smart local energy systems. And so we need to see that strong government policy coupled with rigorous governance and regulation to make sure we get joined up planning and integrated operation. And so we need to see action from government and Ofgem here. We need to see the establishment of long-term policy objectives and instruments. We need to see the devolution of statutory powers, responsibilities, and capabilities to the local areas that are ultimately going to be delivering smart local energy systems. And this includes supporting investment in their net zero teams through long-term funding, as well as starting to prioritise net zero in procurement policies. We also need to see obligations placed on DNOs or DSOs, because they have a very critical role in enabling and unlocking smart local energy systems, and they really need to be a big part of this picture. And of course, in this very different future where people are going to have different sorts of roles to play, we need to ensure that consumer protection is fit for purpose. Next slide, please. So as well as those strong governance structures, we also need to see better collaboration across that diverse group of stakeholders that are working to deliver SLES, because they may have very different goals and priorities from one another. And so this can be done by ensuring that folk involved and those stakeholders involved see a mutual advance or gain from working together, from ensuring that there are good communications, that trust is built, that there is legitimacy in the decision-making processes, and that within those teams delivering smart local energy systems, that there are strong leadership and governance structures across the stakeholders involved. And of course, this doesn't just materialize by itself. And our research highlighted the importance of paying attention to establishing those strong project management practices right from the outset. This includes getting very early agreement on the goals and objectives of the smart local energy system and creating a shared vision of what success looks like, and of course, ensuring to set up those transparent and fair procedures around decision-making and accountability. Next slide, please. So our third building block is all about building new skills across the range of different areas that are needed for SLES. And this ranges from the more sort of technical engineering and trades related skills, all the way through to some of the softer skills that are critical to build public engagement. And we definitely need to see new types of training. And this includes like formal training at schools and colleges. It includes short courses. It includes on-the-job and peer learning, and it includes wider knowledge acquisition. So all of these are important to build the right skills for smart local energy systems. But we see significant barriers that need to be overcome to unlock these. First of all, we see a bit of a lack of demand for some of the new skills, in part due to the policy uncertainty around the future energy system. We see challenges with getting qualification accreditation processes set up because this takes time and resources. And we also see challenges due to lack of flexibility when it comes to things like combining courses to meet the diverse skills that are needed for smart local energy systems. And so we need to see action here. From government, we definitely need to see support with that training within local authorities who have a key role to play in SLES. We need to see stimulation of that supply chain to really help drive action on this side, and making part of that's making sure that there are properly certified qualifications for SLES jobs. That might rely on providing core funding to develop new qualifications, as well as potentially financial support for some of the apprentice programs that will be critically needed. We also need support from the educators and qualifying bodies involved to make sure we're developing appropriate courses and qualifications, making the process more flexible for students to take these, and also building flexibility into the course to just account for the very fast-moving space around smart local energy systems. The other thing that I don't think we do enough of is recognizing and accrediting that lifelong learning and training activities that are actually very important to the SLES space. Next slide, please. Our fourth building block is all about engaging and empowering the community. So I think it's become fairly obvious through the program that community members and end users have very important roles to play in smart local energy systems, but they are typically viewed either as customers or possibly as testers of new technologies, who may be informed about what's going on or possibly sometimes consulted in the development of smart local energy systems. But decades of social science research tells us that if we want to support a more widespread transition where people are really bought in and engaged to this, that it's essential to engage folk earlier in the process and through more interactive or participatory approaches. And then outside of the specific smart local energy system projects that were happening in the PIFA program, we saw that just generally across the country, people didn't really understand either the concept of a SLES or what some of the solutions that sat underneath it were all about. So we need to see much better public engagement if we want to build support for SLES and enable those local communities to really buy into and help shape their own future energy systems. From government, we need to see action addressing this gap between expert and public understandings. It needs to be acknowledged, it needs to be addressed. And that means that we also need to see funding provided to support organisations like local authorities and community groups engage the public effectively. This engagement that will come most likely from SLES developers, which is looking very much like local authorities and their partners in places, it has to happen earlier in the process, and it has to focus on demonstrating why SLES is valuable to people as well as why it offers value to the energy system. Households may also need support to develop the skills to engage with the new technologies that they're going to that are part of these systems. And that includes opportunities to interact with them in advance of adopting them. And then I just want to come back to an earlier finding that smart local energy system projects are incredibly influenced by where their funding comes from. And so when we see those funding calls, we'd like to see better public engagement framed as a more central element of those funding calls. And because this is quite a new space, also ensuring that this funding support that learning between projects around what sort of engagement does and doesn't work in practice. Next slide, please. Our fifth building block is about business models, and investment is a major barrier for SLES, and that is in part because they have incredibly diverse assets, ownership structures, cash flow structures, and so on. And so we need to see new types of financial instruments and business models that can help make these more attractive. And one of the mechanisms that we explored in EnergyREV was around asset securitization. And there is much more detail in the full report. But I guess essentially this would allow smart local energy systems to operate as a single organizational business and financial unit, making it more equivalent to an energy company providing diverse energy services to customers. But approaches like these have to be underpinned by strong corporate governance and risk management strategies. And we certainly need more work to explore some of the novel financial mechanisms in more depth. So we need to see more work comparing asset securitization to other financing mechanisms. We need to make sure we're identifying any regulatory and legal implications and making sure these are raised with the appropriate bodies. And for any solutions like this, we really need to see the implementation of those strong corporate governance and risk management frameworks when deploying SLES. Next slide, please. Our sixth building block is about market value, because current market structures really prevent SLES from being fully rewarded from the benefits that they bring. In many cases, local energy markets can unlock value, but they're held back by things like the mechanisms for managing uncertainty from issues like the behavior dependence of flexible loads, upstream energy prices, and network congestions are just not clear. It's also not clear how some of the conflicts and constraints between transmission and distribution networks will be managed. And there are risks as well that any planning decisions related to investment could undermine the value of smart local energy systems, which is often driven by the flexibility services they can bring. In our full report, we outline how these can be overcome by smarter approaches, for example, things like multi-scale market design. But solutions like this require cooperation between regulators, the TSO, DSOs, and developers of smart local energy system, energy trading platforms or energy marketplaces. And if we want to implement this, we need to see roles and responsibilities being much more clearly defined. We need to see new techniques like machine learning or improved modeling of behavior being better integrated into those market models we use. And we need an approach developed to really help manage that uncertainty, those conflicts, and the flexibility between distribution and transmission levels. Next slide, please. And our final building block is about the cyber-physical infrastructure that is needed to support the smart operation of smart local energy systems. And there is no magic bullet solution, I'm sad to say, but instead the information and communication technology elements that are required will really depend on the sorts of technologies that are included, the energy vectors that covers, the key objectives of the systems and what constraints there might be, as well as things like the time horizons and the resolutions that are needed to manage the smart local energy system. That said, whilst there's no one-size-fits-all system, we also need to move away from the totally bespoke solutions that we're seeing today. And all solutions should really be flexible, scalable, and replicable, because this allows smart local energy systems to evolve over time with growing sets of use cases, with connections of new devices or assets, with new data systems, new data analysis requirements. It allows them to evolve as more end users might be added to the system, and it allows them to be transplanted into similar problems in other locations as well. But this isn't happening in the current environment where the cyber-physical infrastructure is defined on a project-by-project basis. So we need to see greater attention from government and regulators, including things like creating a common understanding of all the functions in a smart local energy system, setting shared standards to support interoperability, enhancing cybersecurity, and embedding stronger ethical practices, especially when it comes to those new techniques like machine learning or artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. So we've done a real rapid run through of the insights and recommendations across the 7 SLES building blocks, but I'd like to close by reflecting on some of the cross-cutting challenges that we saw and the next steps. So first off, smart local energy systems sit across many existing policy silos, and there's not really a policy owner to drive them forward. So we need to see that. We need to see a policy owner assigned to create this national vision and strategy for smart local energy systems, if we're serious about them. Local authorities play a key role here, and they need to have the right power, resources, and capacity to act. So we need to see power and resources devolved to local authorities to deliver SLES. SLES also introduce a lot of complexity into energy system planning and operation. So we need to build better governance and accountability structures across the public, private, and third sectors. The fourth point's around aligning value, because SLEDs are being delivered by a range of stakeholders working together, many of whom have different objectives, values, and needs. So to ensure the success of SLEDs, we need to align those values and objectives across stakeholders at the outset. And finally, we need to reframe innovation and talk openly about failures, because SLEDs mark a real departure from our existing planning and operational paradigms, and failure is an important but necessary component of learning and innovating. Right now, I don't think we've got the political permission to talk about failure in net zero, but we must address this. We must embed a learning culture so that we can collectively learn and improve SLEDs and keep going on the challenging journey to net zero working together. Thank you very much.
That was fabulous. Really well done, Becky. That is hundreds of reports and insights synthesized into 20 minutes of top quality content. So that's just astounding. So what we're going to do now is have a panel discussion. So we have 4 wonderful panelists to react to what we've just heard. So they've all had an early preview copy of the report that Becky's just talked to. So whilst they're all getting spotlighted, so that's going to be Carol Randall from Essex County Council, Mary Brooks from Low Carbon Hub, Alex Long from Welsh Government, and Fiona Campbell from Ofgem. What we're going to do in this session is I've asked each of the panelists to essentially firstly introduce themselves and briefly their organisation, and then to just tell us something about how they've reacted to the findings from EnergyREV, but also, as the title of the panel suggests, what do we need to do to unlock these the next steps for smart local energy systems? So what is it within there that's either really, really difficult or really, really important in all of that? I also note that questions are coming in thick and fast, which is brilliant. Keep them coming. What we'll be doing after we've had the panelists have had a chance to react to the report is we'll get Becky and Stephen into this panel and we'll start to get through some of those questions as well. So without further ado, in the order that it just appeared on that slide, so I'm looking at you, Carol. So it's going to be Carol, Mary, Alex, Fiona, in that order. So Carol, could you introduce yourself and give us just a few minutes kind of like reflections on kind of like what you've heard and how it affects the sort of things you're up to in Essex. So Carol, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Carol Randall. I am with Essex County Council. I have a rather long job title, not the longest I've ever had. I'm an Energy and Low Carbon Project Development Officer. Working predominantly on a kind of area around renewables and innovation, but as the report and the findings and so forth from this particular activity suggests, it's very hard to silo, and nor would we want to silo any of those particular activities. So to just give you a flavour of the kind of thing that I get involved with, I'm helping to deliver an Ofgem SIF, so Strategic Innovation Fund supported activity around a just transition to net zero for low income districts. I'm also leading a project under Innovate UK's net zero living cohort, and I think there's probably quite a few of my fellow cohort members in the audience today. I'm looking at local area energy planning and, kind of where does SLES end and LAPES begin? Not quite sure about that one at the moment. So I have a really diverse and interesting portfolio of activity. I'm really lucky to work for Essex County Council because we are a tier 1 authority that takes this kind of thing really, really seriously. And we're resourced better than some, still not as well as we would like to be, but certainly better than some. And at the moment, we're currently going through an internal business planning activity, which is going to see us resourced up until 2030. So we're taking this way beyond the political cycle, shall we say. Thoughts on the report. So I put off reading most of it until today, actually. I kind of diarised it for last week when I had the opportunity to, and then thought, actually, no, I'd rather speak with a slightly kind of fresher set of insights, perhaps, at this particular event. So I think and key thoughts around this are that there's a huge amount within this that talks to the traditional local authority agenda, and that's obviously reflected in some of the commentary within the report explicitly, but implicitly, so much of this is around jobs, skills, environment, vulnerable households, planning, transportation, that kind of thing. So it's fairly straightforward, I think, where the co-benefits between local authority business as usual and SLES kind of occur, but also I like the resonance here that local authorities can and should have a really strong voice within the building blocks that have been identified within the report. So obviously around influencing policy, skills, collaborative environments and empowering communities, but increasingly that kind of newer stuff for us, which is around the idea of unlocking innovative business models and coordination and particularly communication with the DNO. And we're very lucky with the DNO or DSO in our particular area. I think it also increasingly opens up, kind of opportunities for us to influence network management and development. Data, clearly hugely important around all of this. And again, absolutely key to it is the human context. And community engagement particularly. So an awful lot of what this does, what the report says resonates with what we're trying to do, and the support and change required within the local authority arena to really enable SLES more widely, I think is quite accurately reflected in the report as well. I like the fact that it acknowledges that there are a diversity of projects that have been used as kind of like the initial study points for this activity, and that might have been an analytical nightmare, but it is absolutely the reality of the situation that we're dealing with at the moment, largely driven by grassroots movements to date, which I think in some instances have encountered success largely in spite of, rather than because of the systems that we currently find ourselves operating in. But widely, there's an awful lot of resonance here with my day-by-day activity and around experiences and barriers and so forth. So what does this kind of report mean for ECC? Well, I think for a start, it affirms that we're acting in the right kind of spaces, and we really recognise ourselves in this agenda with the kind of work that we've been doing so far and the sort of stuff that we've got planned. I think it definitely opens up new opportunities for us to fulfil some of our more traditional roles, but at the same time highlights opportunities for us to branch out into new areas, and it is quite a big but. As a sector, we are incredibly risk averse, somewhat cash strapped, and fairly poorly resourced in terms of people. Having said ECC is doing a very good job at this, the 12 districts that I work with are not so lucky, basically. So we need to kind of stick to what we're good at, but do it in a different way. So using that power of convening, partnering, the trusted body that was mentioned during Becky's presentation, to be able to provide a framework for kind of SLES style activities, but at the same time be trying to chip away at that massive context of systems change. So those are my
Fabulous. Fabulous. Thank you very much. That's an excellent start. Thank you, Carol. Mary, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for that, Carol. A lot of that resonates with me as someone who formerly worked in local government. So I'm Mary Brooks. I'm the Smart Energy Systems Director at Low Carbon Hub. We are an energy business run for the benefit of the community, based in Oxfordshire, and our core operation is getting on for 50 renewable assets in and around Oxfordshire that we own and operate. And my part of the business covers the innovation portfolio and the smart energy system side of it, obviously. And so part of what we do with our surplus is all of our surplus has to be used for the benefit of the community, and some of that is investing in our innovation activities. And a huge part of that for us in the last getting on for 5 years now was working on Project Leo, which was one of the big PFER demonstrator projects in which we were working with Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks alongside their transition programme to establish their flexibility markets and to test and trial that using assets in and around Oxfordshire within the SSEN network area, including all of our renewable assets. And we also worked on a much more exploratory open approach, which was our Smart and Fair Neighbourhood projects, where we reached out to some of our, we have around 40, I think we're on 46 community shareholder groups. We reached out to some of them to say, what are your energy challenges? What are you trying to achieve? would you be interested in working with us to explore how flexibility and smart systems might be able to help achieve those goals? And that's really kind of been the grounding point for everything that we're now moving forwards into. And so I suppose in terms of the response to the report, partly I kind of look at all of the stuff that's come out of this, and it just takes me back to that funding period up to the end of March last year. And I'm going, was that really only March last year? In a slightly fearful as well as very happy kind of way. It can be quite overwhelming, right? There's an awful lot of stuff in there. But I think the other thing is that in some ways there's not really loads that you would say is kind of rocket science or surprising. It's it's all things that we would recognize. It's all things that sort of make sense. And actually, in some ways, what that reinforces for me is that we're on a learning curve. We're going through cycles, and that's reassuring because we're getting better at this every time we're doing it. And actually, just listening to Becky's overview, it really was kind of making me think, oh yes, there's little bits and pieces in there I really would quite like to go back and use and make sure that we are doing that rather than reinventing it from scratch, because there's so much material out there that that's relevant to everything that we continue innovating on. In terms of kind of what I think's critical, I think there's two things that I would flag. One is that point about aligning value. I think really speaks to the community energy sector that we kind of operate within and are part of, in that from our perspective, if you're looking right at the edge of the grid where households and businesses are using energy, ultimately communities and network operators want something that they've got needs that are very much in common and are aligned. So communities want affordable, clean and reliable energy. And when I say community, I mean businesses as well, all the people using the energy there. And network operators want to touch the network once, is the phrase that we hear a lot from Scottish and Southern Electricity, who are the largest DNO in Oxfordshire. And that's really about them not wanting, in a period of 50 years, they know they've got load growth, they know they have to invest in the network. They just want to do that as efficiently as possible. And the struggle, of course, is they don't know quite how fast one place is going to go compared to another. And with the best will in the world, the processes for investing into the network and doing that reinforcement, they're changing. So I certainly wouldn't want to do my SSEN friends down. They're definitely changing, but let's face it, they come from a place where you just wait for it to get old and then you replace it, as opposed to you need to replace something because there's load growth. And so there's a huge aligned value in there, because really what you need to get both of those things, or one of the ways that you can get both of the needs for the community and the network operator, is around peak management. That comes from demand reduction in kind of traditional energy efficiency fabric sense, as well as peak management with flexibility. And that's obviously where SLES comes in. And then the second thing that I touch on is just that for us, one of the big things that came out of Project Leo was that in those smart and fair neighbourhood projects, we were stepping into a kind of emergent, or we kind of realised we were stepping into a role which at the time we were calling local convener. We've kind of shifted the language in that a bit. We're now referring to it as grid edge coordinator. And we're doing quite a lot of work as part of our own kind of CIF funded programme to develop that as a service, because really what we see is that where you've got kind of a wider world of local area energy coordination, which includes the kind of local authority-led local area energy planning, what we're seeing coming in terms of regional energy and strategic planning role, there's a tactical level to that as well. There's a tactical bit where you need coordination, and that's the grid edge coordinator role. And so that's the thing that we're really focused on in terms of working out how we can do more of that.
Fabulous. That sounds really interesting. That might come up in Q&A as well. Let's see. Right, I'm going to move on to Alex. So Alex, on you go.
Oh, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Long, and I work for the Welsh Government as an Energy Delivery Manager. So I manage the package of support we offer the community energy sector in Wales. So in Wales, we provide funding for the Welsh Government Energy Service and Community Energy Wales. And we do this to try and enable them to provide technical and commercial support to community enterprises to develop renewable projects. We also offer a local energy grant scheme for community-led projects, which is managed via our Welsh Government Energy Service. And most recently, as part of a cooperation agreement between Plaid Cymru and the Welsh Government, we share an ambition to establish a publicly owned energy company for Wales, which is EnergyREV, which Jeff touched on earlier. And the ambition of EnergyREV is to expand community-owned renewable energy generation and smart local energy systems across Wales. So some thoughts of mine on the report. I really welcome the report. I think it's come at a great time for Wales and our current thinking around EnergyREV and how it can enable communities to develop smart local energy systems. I think the report highlights how SLES makes sense for us and our future generations, but also it's really complex and requires stakeholder collaboration across a range of activities and sectors. It also highlights how much is already happening across the UK. So I'm really interested to understand how we can collaborate and share learnings and just keep up the momentum of all this great work that's already happened. So in Wales, we've got a really ambitious government who want to create a stronger, fairer, greener Wales. And I think that's a really exciting place to be, as it brings us opportunities to scope and develop further the work of EnergyREV and SLES. So already demonstrating our ambition in Wales for this sector, we adopted the proposal for at least 1.5 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity to be locally owned by 2035. And we have already achieved 97% of our original 1 gigawatt target by 2030. I think it's a great time to be living in Wales. I'm a Welsh citizen, and I'm really proud of the innovative community groups who've helped us achieve some of these ambitions already. So I suppose the question now is, how do we keep going? And this is where we see the opportunity for EnergyREV to complement the great work of the Energy Service and Community Energy Wales. And so EnergyREV is positioning Wales at the forefront of developing and delivering smart local energy projects, which deliver more localised energy. And we're really keen to encourage local ownership across a wide range of technologies and scales of development. So how we've tried to enable some of this via EnergyREV is we've committed already £900,000 of resource grants to community energy groups in Wales. So this will help community groups to employ the necessary staff to accelerate project delivery. Our EnergyREV functions are already underway. So we've got an EnergyREV team and we're working closely with Jeff, which has been a real pleasure. And we're starting to conduct renewable energy asset stock takes across Wales. What we're hoping to achieve from this is understand what assets we already have in Wales and how EnergyREV can help to optimise, smarten and grow them. Some thoughts from me as well is I think as policymakers, we need to think systematically and create the right set of metrics to successfully deliver SLES. Our local area energy planning is expected to identify some of the opportunities and partnerships with local authorities which could bring forward SLES projects and hopefully accelerate some of this work. I also think it's really important for us to be constantly evaluating and questioning whether we are being too predictable in our thinking. And I think if we plan that everything's going to be a success, then we're probably going to be disappointed, which is why stakeholder collaboration, I think, is key. And just having that opportunity, like we have today, to feed back on some of our learnings. And I'm going to finish on a point as a civil servant, but also as a mum. And I think this ties in quite nicely about all the different roles that people have to play in delivering smart local energy systems. I think we need to recognise there are lots of different customer journeys to successfully implementing SLES, and to ensure a just transition, I would just play on the point that we need to try and make it as easy as possible for people, attractive, social, and as timely as we can. Thank you.
Excellent message to finish on there. And thank you, Alex. And yes, I will agree that it's wonderful to be doing work in Wales. It really is a good place to try and do this stuff. Last but not least, Fiona, please, over to you.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And hello, everybody. I'm Fiona Campbell. I head up the Local Governance and Flexibility Strategy team at Ofgem. So we've got sort of two big focuses in that team that are really relevant to the work of EnergyREV, albeit it's sort of the EnergyREV report itself has many more wider touch points on a raft of Ofgem's work. So my team's responsible for the local governance review. So in this review, we've looked at some of the key functions, so the key activities on the distribution system. So how planning is being delivered, how flexibility markets are being facilitated, and the real-time operations of the network. And so we looked at the governance of that, so the roles and responsibilities for how those activities are delivered, and are they fit for purpose for achieving the net zero flexible energy system that we so need. And so we've been doing that work now for a couple of years, and towards the end of last year, we published our decision confirming our intention to proceed with reforming these arrangements. And sort of two critical pillars to that are introducing new regional energy strategic planners, as well as introducing a new single market facilitator for local flex markets. So that's one big aspect. And then the other aspect sort of builds on that and is making sure that we have a coherent strategy overall for distributed flexibility. And this starts to really bring some of that DSO level thinking into how this touches on sort of consumers, and really making sure that we can tap into domestic level flex. So that's the work of sort of my team and the kind of lens that I come at this at. I think for me, again, sort of echoing other panelists' comments, the report's really timely. I think in coming to our decision last year, I hope that we sort of have a direction of travel that you feel is aligned with lots of what EnergyREV's conclusions are seeking, and in particular in that building block 1 on sort of that strong institutional and governance landscape. And so with the RESPs and the market facilitator, I think we've taken a lot of learnings from EnergyREV, from the PIFA programme overall, that help to set out that foundational layer of governance that supports a more decentralised landscape. But that doesn't mean we can sort of sit back and be like, nope, there's nothing for us to hear now, guys, with this report, it's all done. I think why it's so timely is that we're now moving into the real detailed design, which of course is the tricky bit of how all of those new roles actually come together and how that they really achieve the outcomes that we want to see in the energy system. And so I think as we sort of look at those roles in detail, but also how they interact together, so how the RESPs interact with the market facilitator, interact with the DSOs operating the network to bring together that coherent system, I think that's where we can really start to get into some of those detailed learnings. I think in particular that feels quite relevant to the building block on market value. I think we want to look at how those new governance arrangements really allow us to have a much more optimized system. And I think that chimes with a lot of the learnings from the report. And so hopefully we can kind of use this as another sort of fresh chance to sort of engage and think about it. I think for me, though, we probably come at it on a slightly different angle of not thinking how do we enable smart local energy systems, but we're looking at, you know, there's numerous challenges in the energy system right now, and we've got a really clear target of where we want to get to, you know, one that may well become more ambitious. And so for us in setting out that policy and regulatory landscape, it's really how do we utilize all the tools we've got available to meet those, so, you know, to get past those challenges. And that's where I think we're really keen to sort of engage with the learnings from SLES and see how how SLES can alleviate those challenges. And so I think that's, yeah, a slightly different angle of how we want to look at it. But I think that is all the more sort of reason why this report's so timely.
Thank you, Fiona. And of course, yes, SLES does not have all of the answers, sadly, but it's got some, I think, that we can certainly say from the report itself. So thank you to our panelists for beautifully keeping your comments on-piste and to time. So I'm going to bring in both Becky and Stephen for a wider discussion. So also thank you to everyone who's been putting questions into the chat. I think we're up to 16 questions now, and you've been religiously upvoting particular questions. And the first one is one that came in really early, which I think is a really important one because it's from Nigel Hargreaves. And Nigel's asking about essentially kind of like what's the difference between a local area energy plan and a smart local energy system? And are they competing? Which I think is a really interesting take on that. So I'm going to take chair's prerogative because I've been looking at that question for a while now. And I think, to my mind, Nigel, they aren't competing. They're sort of the same thing in many ways. So in some ways, a local area energy plan is a democratic process in some way to decide what the energy vision and future is in a place. A smart local energy system is the same thing, but run as optimally as is appropriate to that place, and tries to achieve the benefits that that place wants to achieve. So there's all of that kind of stuff going on. But anyway, that's my initial take on that. Becky, I was just wondering if I could come to you on that one, because you've probably thought about this one as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I want to say on that is, and it comes back to the building block around market design, and I guess some of the key insights that we need to be thinking about the planning and operation in a more joined up way, because some of those benefits that smart local energy systems can unlock, both in places and nationally, are brought about through the value of the flexibility that they can provide, both locally and nationally. And so obviously the way in which you're looking at the planning and ultimately the investment in infrastructure completely interplays with your ability then to deliver flexibility and how valuable that flexibility is. And so I don't think they're different things. I don't think they're the same thing, but I think that they need to 100% go hand in hand. Otherwise, we probably have a huge risk that we don't maximize the value of either.
Excellent, thank you. And just in the usual way, panelists, just wave your hands at me if you wanted to come in on a question. Carol, I did see that you were nodding actually, so I'm going to pick on you, which is unfair.
Not at all, not at all. No, I mean, at the moment, ECC is trying to wrap our heads around what role do we have in creating a local area energy plan. We have 12 districts, 2 unitaries stuck on the edge of our county. We also have like a self-clustering thing going on with Essex councils in the south of the county, Essex councils in the north of the county. They're both developing their own kind of economic plans, although clearly they're not going to be substantially different from each other. So I'm kind of one of a small number of colleagues at the moment who's kind of looking at this. And I think the idea of local plans is clearly something which is born and bred of local authority. So to kind of mute that over to a local area energy plan feels reasonably comfortable within that particular environment. SLES is, as we've said, complementary. There's a big old Venn diagram thing going on there, but also it's like quite scarily amorphous, and it's about systems change and not the natural kind of stuff that local authorities get involved with. So I think there's definitely room for both of those. But I mean, what we're doing at the moment is we're kind of at the point of outreach to some of the early adopters for LAPES, and to kind of see what format those things took, how they're going. But what's rapidly, and it kind of speaks for itself, but a local area energy plan is not really a plan. It's not a static thing. It's not something that kind of has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a way of thinking. It's a series of principles that you work to, targets that you work to, and that I think complements the SLES way of thinking, kind of really, really strongly. But as I sort of said jokingly during my little blurb earlier, where is the line between the two? And I think it's increasingly a blurred thing.
So well spotted, Nigel, as well, on that particular question. So I'm gonna keep us moving on and get through as many of these questions as we can. So I'm going to take two together and see who fancies coming at these, because they're a little bit related, but they're coming at different angles. So there's a question from Abby, which is about whether there's a postcode lottery of smart local energy systems, where some communities are going to benefit and some are going to be left behind, which I think is a really important question. And then there's a question from Simon about community energies being mentioned, but did EnergyREV see a role for community energy over and above the general importance of communities? And I'm going to put that in inverted commas. So there's two sorts of things in there. So role of communities or community energy in particular, but also this postcode lottery side of things. So Mari, do you have any thoughts? Because I know you've worked with a lot of communities, but also you've worked with a number of different kind of like areas in Oxfordshire, you know, probably sitting on different sides of the spectrum of the kind of like the wealth or otherwise in those communities. So just any thoughts on those two?
Absolutely. Well, I guess picking on kind of, the postcode lottery side of things, there's a real risk of that for starters. So I think that's something we need to act not to do. And that's part of the whole discourse around what a just transition is and making sure that you're trying to take that account from the beginning. And we kind of tackle that, but we face that in quite a specific way, because where we're doing innovation, we are often working with communities that tend to be more affluent. And we're often working with community groups that tend to be resourced by people who are retired or more well off or whatever, have got the kind of ability to spend time on it, or whatever reason it is they've got to that position. And so there's a real balance there, because when you're doing trials and you're doing innovation, you're trying to develop new things, actually it's really important that you kind of do no harm, and that you're not putting people at risk as a result of being involved in that. So you do actually want to work with certainly kind of a community steering group or community leaders who've got some capability and understanding and ability to judge risk and what they're signing up to, and if people are going to be participants. It's as much about us making sure that we're giving all the information about benefits as well as disbenefits, and we'd always kind of make sure that we weren't ever going to leave somebody less well off, but it's just things like hassle factor and taking part in evaluation, all of that kind of stuff that actually you want to do with people who are kind of have resilience, and not just resilience, enthusiasm for it probably, but then you're skewing who you're doing it with. And obviously you don't want to be risking anyone who's in the vulnerable consumer category. So you've got to also design in how you're going to take account of that. And so I think there's definitely a risk of postcode lottery, and I think it's really on businesses and and funders when they're doing innovation to make sure that we're building in the mechanisms to deal with that. We certainly have kind of gone through a process, and I'm sure it will evolve, which is around characterizing different community use cases. So we have examples of communities who are highly committed, actually highly resourced as well. They've got people who've worked in the energy sector, who have time on their hands, all that kind of stuff, and they're quite capable of going off and creating their own kind of neighborhood level local area energy plan. And maybe you're coming to us for a bit of a quality check or a sounding board or something like that, and there's a lot of collaborative working there. We actually kind of see ourselves being more valuable where you've got kind of the highly committed, possibly expert but lower resource organized communities. But actually, and I think there was something in there about the kind of local authority going to that grid edge coordinator role I was talking about. One of the other categories we've identified is where you've got a proactive local authority. So it's not a community that's coming to us saying we want to do something, but we've worked with district councils who can spot the strategic opportunities, want to know what the art of the possible is, want access to our expertise about that kind of on the ground grid edge art of the possible. But it's a very different thing to be doing when you haven't got kind of the people who live there as proactively involved. So how do we do that really, really well? So I think that's probably what I've got to say on postcode lottery. What was the other bit?
Oh, it was about communities, but that'll do. That's
That'll
plenty.
do.
I think it's covering off all of that. And I was wondering, Alex or Fiona? Fiona, yes. I was wondering if either of you wanted to come on, and that's so Fiona, please.
Yeah, I suppose just sort of to kind of come in briefly, I think I said it's a really valid point to raise, and I think it's a concern that sort of we would want to consider actively as a regulator. I think that's where it does sort of for us looking at sort of how these solutions help with those wider strategic priorities, those challenges, and can be used. And where that is possible, we want to enable that, look at how you can have the appropriate sort of market design so that participants can be rewarded, but do so in a way that is cognizant of the wider distributional impacts, and make sure that there's then provision in place for those areas that won't have this as a solution. And I guess that's always the challenge, is how we sort of take these things up on a scalable policy basis and make sure it does have fair outcomes. So I think that's one angle. I think the other aspect is, I think it's why it's really important that we work closely with government colleagues on this as the regulator, because I think actually the thing that will prevent a postcode lottery, if this is scaled, sort of goes out at scale, is that you have all of the bits of the kind of policy and regulatory framework to make sure it functions, whereas there's a risk if we remove some barriers in isolation without thinking of a sort of knock-on sort of need at something that's within government remit or vice versa. That's, I think, when you can really exacerbate that kind of postcode lottery landscape. So I think that close working, and then of course working with sort of those who actually have the insights on the ground.
You're muted, Jeff.
Hi, Becky. I think you wanted to come in as well. And thanks, Fiona.
I did, yeah. I wanted to sort of emphasize, I agree with everything that's been said. I think sometimes we default into talking about benefits from thinking about people participating in flexibility markets and focusing just on those financial benefits. But a couple of things that came out of the EnergyREV research, one was a piece of modelling that did make assumptions about those financial benefits from flexibility, but showed that even if you weren't participating, you would still benefit, because those benefits fed through to the entire UK energy system as well. So I think that it's just important to acknowledge that. But also, a lot of the other benefits that came to be were not necessarily explicitly at the household level, but they were wider benefits in the system as well. So I think we just probably shouldn't necessarily forget about those. That said, I 100% think that this is a risk. Those places that can and have those resources are doing this. I don't think that's a reason not to be pushing the envelope and pushing the boundary and innovating, but I think it really tells us that we need to be focusing a lot more on ways of supporting that knowledge translation, supporting knowledge sharing, and enabling the learnings that are happening in one place to be really well translated to other places. And I just want to say, I think, the Innovate Thriving Places program that's just kicked off is engaging way more places than PIFA did. So I do see this as kind of an evolving knowledge ecosystem, which is really great. Tackling the question that I don't think others have, which is around the role of community energy. I 100% think there is a role for community energy here. And certainly when we looked at the PIFA project, a number of them did engage with community energy groups or community energy assets. I think that really it's about those different local stakeholders working together, because putting too much on community energy groups is a risk, given that they're often voluntary. They're often also suffer from maybe some of the similar demographic tendencies towards perhaps people that have older people, retired people that have time contributing, and others maybe struggling to get involved. That said, community energy groups, like local authorities, know the people in their communities best, and it would be absolutely crazy to be pushing solutions like this without involving them. And I think the sort of projects that Mary and Carol are involved in are really exciting. I know more about the one in Oxfordshire because it was one of the PIFA projects, but to see the community groups working so closely with the local authority, with the county council, as well as the city council, with the network companies and so on, it was really exciting. And I think that's a really critical element of future opportunities.
Thanks, Becky. And I think Alex is coming, and Stephen, you're off mute as well. Are you going to come in on that one as well?
Well, let's let Alex go.
Perfect. Alex, who are you got?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, just a really quick point. I think you're absolutely right, Rebecca. Communities have got a really strong part to play in this. Our communities, as in the people who live in our communities, but also community energy groups. And we found that the support that we've offered by providing resource grants, that's really helped within the community energy groups to bring in the expertise they need to help us work some of this out. And we're also very collaborative and working with community energy groups who are helping us actually shape our thinking in Wales. And we absolutely couldn't do any of this without them. So they've really got a strong role to play, I think. Thanks.
I have a quick one.
Quick one, then I'll get us in another couple of questions.
Yeah, I know. The community energy sector in the UK employs over 550 full-time equivalent staff. And that's the size of a department in Whitehall or any other part of government. So it is a sizable sector and it has employees and resources, and we shouldn't forget that.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to get us another couple of questions. So just to note that, Kev, I have seen your question in the chat. Others will have noticed it as well. And that's going to be the last question, which is, if you could wave a magic wand, which rule change would panelists ask for? So you can think about that one, not now. It's going to be the very final question in about 6 minutes' time. So kind of like really short answers on that. I'm going to pick up two slightly different questions. So one's from Rosie, which is, what are the best mechanisms for ensuring that regulated entities, I guess like DNOs, etc., are incentivized to share data in order for smaller innovative companies to develop meaningful products? So there's a question in there, I think, probably for both Stephen and for Fiona, I would imagine. Others welcome on that. And then there's a question from Louise as well about governance and finance being key. Do you have any lessons from the EnergyREV programme or more widely amongst this panel around how to be investable in these SLES type propositions, but keep the long-term focus on affordability and gain share? So sharing those benefits locally, I guess, in that instance. So two quite different questions. There's a kind of like, how do you get the incentives and the rules right on getting data so that you can have this innovation? And then how do you ensure that these propositions are investable, but with the right kind of like long-term sustainable models? So Stephen, do you want to come in on, well, both of them possibly, but certainly the data one?
Sure. So for me, the data question always splits into two. So there's the overarching data that allows you to plan and design and build these type of smart local energy systems. And then there's the data down at the operational level that allows you to run them in real time. And there's slightly different constraints and issues around both of those elements. But I think we need to recognise that there's those two elements of data. And I've got quite a simple answer to this. I mean, I think it goes back to what we say in the report about identifying what benefits we're trying to unlock through smart local energy systems, what value it delivers to the stakeholders, and that collaborative piece. So the incentivisation should come round about from how we link that all together from the DNOs through to the consumer. And then looking at, are there technologies or approaches of sharing that data that obfuscates some of the parts of the data that might allow you to see too much about consumer behaviour that you shouldn't see, or that such that the end users can trust it a bit more. So I think there's a mixture of jointly identifying the benefits and the value of sharing that data, and then working out the correct mechanisms to show the parts of it that can be shared or should be shared for the operational or design and planning reasons, and then other bits may not be and might be separated off. So, and I think there are models in other industries where you start to partition the data sets into the different areas that can be shared for different reasons, and maybe we just need systematic analysis of that and the benefits and value that comes from smart local energy systems. So that would be a high-level description. It might be worth bringing some other people in around that, but that's where I always start from.
Thanks, Stephen. And Fiona?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with everything Stephen just said, and therefore I suppose to offer a kind of angle on what's the current actual sort of state of play with the regulatory framework. I think this is actually an area that is really positive and we've made great strides on. So the current price control for the DNOs is the Rio ED2 price control. And within that, there's sort of two big elements that should really enhance this. So all companies have got to have digitalization strategies, and they cover sort of a range of things, but including sort of essentially transitioning to being sort of digital-based organizations and starting to really unlock the use of some of those tools that Stephen mentioned. But then on a really kind of firm level, we've also got data best practice guidance. And this is sort of the really kind of boring regulatory stuff that never hits the headlines, but is the things that drives the most value. And so that sets really prescriptive guidance and rules, you know, that sort of the DNOs must comply with about how they share data, and critically that data should be really open, and it really applies an openness principle. So that's in place. Of course, there will then sort of still be other things. So I think the thing that I would flag is, as well as those sort of digital and data specific elements, we're also driving the DNOs to really enhance their DSO capabilities in the current price control. And part of that is testing stakeholder satisfaction with how they're delivering that. And so I would urge innovators to sort of, you know, engage with their DNOs, knock on their door. It might be that they didn't know that data was valuable and that's why it's not shared. But actually, if you don't get a good response, it should be captured in that stakeholder incentive and driven there, so that hopefully we're coming at it from those both sides that really drive that openness and approach.
Thank you, Fiona. Carol, please.
Yeah, can I just on that last point that Fiona made about openness of data and the role of the DNO, the DSO in all of this, I'd just like to big up UK Power Networks. They're our local DNO. We've partnered with them on a number of projects, past and current, in terms of their role behind data. And they have a facility called Your Local Net Zero Hub. And if you're into numbers and maps, and I'm into numbers and maps, then it is like heaven. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a wonderful interactive resource, 161 data sets, I think, within it, that enables you to visualize so many different scenarios within a particular geography. So there are DNOs out there that are doing a fantastic job. So hats off to UK Power Networks, because we're partnering with them incredibly successfully at the moment, and I'm sure we will continue to do so.
Noted. And I've just joined UKPN's DSO supervisory board as well. So it's I can pass that one on direct. Right, time is getting away from us, as I knew it would in this panel discussion, because there's loads to go here. So we're not going to get through all of the questions. What I'm going to do in the 2 minutes we've got left is come back to Kev's questions. So Kevin Bailey, and his question was really, if you had a magic wand, what one rule change would you change, I guess, to enable SLES? So if you could do that. So we're not going to have time to go around everyone, so we've got 1 minute left now, but who would like to just wave at me hard if you would like to come in? Yes. So Mary, what's your one rule change? Quick as you can.
Local energy trading, please.
Local energy trading, please. All right. Who else? Stephen. Sorry.
I'm going very high level. So for innovation projects, it's that Becky talked about, the knowledge translation, the learning and the continual synthesis of what works and what doesn't work, and make sure that's widely known.
Synthesis. Becky.
More agility in terms of the way funding for these projects is devolved and then managed.
Wonderful. Alex.
Energy for schools, so our children grow up to be interested and understand what all this means.
Brilliant. Carol, go on, you can have one as well.
Okay, so greater appetite for perceived risk within local authorities. We have so many powers that we do not use at all, and so many that we don't use in the way that would be the most productive.
Fabulous. And Fiona.
I suppose I can't answer what Ofgem should do, but for regional strategic planners, really working closely with DESNA so we can get clarity on what's envisaged for local area energy planning and the role there. That would be my wish.
Brilliant. Look, thank you to all of our panelists. That was superb. Really enjoyed that discussion. Thank you to all of the questions we've had in. extra special thank you to Becky for putting this report together and then summarising it so eloquently and getting across all of those key messages. And thank you all for turning up. There's been some notes coming on. There's a local zero coming up. The report's now live on the website. So please fill your boots with all of the wonderful EnergyREV bounty that's following on from this. But it's been a genuine, I've really enjoyed today's session, and it's a nice way to finish EnergyREV, I think, all in all. So thank you all for listening, and do follow the reports and the local zero pod, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Jeff, as well, for keeping us all on time.